We welcome Felicia Kreuzer. She's been a part of our team with her better half, Jim, for many decades, contributing their many skills in the preservation and display of telegraph, wireless, and radio technologies. She, with Jim, have written numerous articles on the history of wireless and radio and developed a special focus on wireless and the Titanic's wireless communications. Having appraised numerous Marconi and wireless communication collections, she, with Jim, also designed and built our beautiful Titanic exhibit, also exhibits for the National Maritime Museum in Newport News, Virginia, the Titanic Museum in Branson, Missouri, as well as AWA's absolutely fantastic Titanic exhibit. She, with Jim, have received the AWA House Preservation Award in 1999 and the AWA Medal of Honor in 2014. And she has worked for many years to preserve the history of the radio industry. Member of the AWA board since 2007. She was elected secretary of AWA in 2008, and she is now an assistant curator. Felicia, welcome, and we're great to have you.
Thank you, Mike, and I'm happy to be here. I'm just want to begin with Merry Christmas, and many have said that Christmas time is the most wonderful time of the year. So what better time to introduce a man who created an annual Christmas publication from the 1930s to the 1960s. Hugo Gernsback was quite a man. I'm going to talk about Hugo, his electro importing company, his publishing ventures and advertising, prophecies, sometimes a little quirky, and Christmas card and parodies. Hugo Gernsback was born August 16, 1884 in Luxembourg. His father was a well-to-do wine wholesaler, and his early education was through private tutors. At the age of 9, he read a book called Mars as the Abode of Life, and it stimulated him so much that he ended up creating a fever and went into a delirium for about 2 days. And when he came out, he was never the same. He had a great mind and was always tinkering and learned electrical and scientific pursuits at an early age. By 13, he was doing connecting bells for the convent and did the complete wiring in the convent nearby. And Christmas time in Europe was always a special time. And you can see it in some of his publications when he gets to the December issues. In his 1920s, actually at 19, he emigrated to America with just $200 in his pocket. And he started to create and develop his own products. By 1905, he had actually put together a complete communications outfit comprising a 1-inch spark coil, a key, sender, relay, coherer, and decoherer with all the trappings. It didn't really work very well, and it didn't get much more than probably a mile or two at the most, but it was a start, and it was the beginning of his advertising. He went on to continue to create early apparatus with his electro importing company. And here are some of the selections of parts that he created. He was able to get parts from overseas, and he was able to put together a lot of the equipment that the early amateurs needed in New York. He was an inventor, and he was constantly learning and tinkering and creating. His electro importing store in New York had a huge following. In those days, it was the place to go. And it saw clientele from scientists and inventors to amateurs. They would frequent his store and they picked up a lot of their early equipment to be able to create communications between each other. And there wasn't that much out there in those early days. So his store was very popular. He also met up with Elmo Pickerill and was able to visit the Deforest wireless station at the top of the Waldorf Astoria hotel in the early days. 1908, 1910 was still pretty early in the days of wireless, but they had some great equipment. You can see some of those pieces in the AWA museum. He began to put out catalogs. And the earliest catalog, which is only a few pages that we were able to find, was catalog number 3. But you can see that he had a knack for a colorful cover. Just a few pages, and he had a beautiful electricity with a winged woman flying overhead and those lightning bolts. European and American specialties and novelties. He really knew how to make things attractive. He was also publishing teaching publications, and this is an example of another colorful cover from his catalog 22 for the Electro Importing Company. As you can see, he made catalogs look like something special. And it really did help with sales. He was a genius at marketing when it came to creating those colorful covers. He taught wireless telegraphy. He had a wireless course, and he actually had one where you would get 20 coupons from buying at EI company. And it ran hand in hand. By teaching people, he was able to actually sell more of his goods from the Electro Importing Company store. And this is a copy of the wireless course that you could get when you earned it through coupons. A lot of early amateurs got their beginning there, and it also helped in the very beginning of World War I when they needed Americans to join. There were so many that had gone through Gernsback's store in the early days that actually learned and tinkered and learned wireless in New York City, that ended up going to war and teaching there and working in the trenches with wireless. He had everything from the experimenter in his catalogs, and they ran from 1905 to 1922. These were not quite as elaborate as some of the later magazines, but they were still pretty colorful and really helped him to sell. In 1914, he came out with a catalog, a second catalog, with holiday suggestions. So that was the beginning of, although there was some advertising in some of his early Modern Electric magazines, this was the first time he put out a catalog that was dedicated specifically to Christmas time. And I'm sure it was well worth his while. The Boys Electric Toys was another item that was popular around Christmas time. And I know that my 9-year-old grandson, if you give him something like that, will keep him occupied for hours. And there aren't a whole lot of things that a 9-year-old will stay occupied with for hours. So I'm sure that this was something that sold really well at Christmas time. Gernsback went on to create a magazine empire. In 1908, he published Modern Electrics. It was a small periodical, but it was mostly chock full of articles and information for the amateur experimenter. And it sold pretty well. When he ran out of, or we needed a filler in 1911, he actually put together a serial and began his foray into scientifiction or science fiction by creating a book called Ralph 124C41. It was put out originally in serial and ended up becoming a book later on. By 1913, his Electrical Experimenter was a larger, more colorful magazine. And some of the covers were designed by Frank Paul, who was a great illustrator and had very exotic and strange covers, but they were quite attractive. And anyone that was interested in futuristic designs would like to probably buy it for the cover, but then there was much more inside. In my 1919, his Radio News magazine provided everything for the enthusiast. So here's some examples of modern electrics. There was a Tesla number, an Aerophone number, a special wireless number, and the Wireless Association of America, which was came with a button and became the first club, along with Radio Club of America in those early days. But the modern electrics really came out at a time when it was preempting so many different periodicals of its time. And it really it satisfied a need to learn for the amateurs in the area. Here's an example of a 1908, actually the December 1908 edition. He actually came out with a smaller version, which is quite rare. That's just to the right. And in 1945 was a special reprint that was done for the IRE, I believe. They had a convention and the reprint was one of those giveaways. His magazines ran the gamut, from scientists to leisure activities to French humor. He had quite a varied idea. He was constantly learning and had his finger in a lot of pies, just wanting to know about everything. Sometimes it was a little wacky, but it was always entertaining. Some of his magazines lasted for years. The Electrical Experimenter lasted for many years. And it was something that, as you see, it got into television early on, and there's quite a bit of even futuristic designs. And Frank Paul had a hand in a lot of that. He published over 50 different magazines in his career, into his 80s. And it's possible he's earned a world record. I don't know any other publisher that had published that many magazines, but it was an incredible feat. Some of those magazines only lasted a year or two, and then some went for years. But advertising was needed to pay the bills. You couldn't just have the articles in the publications. And as early as 1908, he began to encourage companies to advertise. He did have editorials in his magazines because he did like to share his ideas, whether they were wacky or not. And an editorial in December 1910 explained to the reader that ads were vital to paying the bills, and he actually listed the costs and showed how the costs of the printing and shipping the magazine could not be covered unless he had some advertising. Here's a few examples of advertising. They were pretty basic back in 1910, but this was an interesting one because you could get a lot of equipment cheap from the Western Electric Salvage Company. A Christmas outfit for $5 and a 50-piece experimental set back in that day, and a free Christmas offer. He was understanding back then that that advertising, and it was a full page, could be lucrative. And so he went in and double dipped a little by putting the back page as a foldout that was all about Christmas suggestions for Electro Importing Company. And some of those items still can be found, but they're getting pretty scarce. And I'm sure if you look at the prices, that we'd all be glad to be able to find something like that. But I guess we can't go back in the time machine and pick up those things for those prices. Any of those items now that you find are a whole lot more. Inflation, well, but it was it's fun to look and dream. He had a few Christmas stories in those December publications. They might include a story as well as creative ads, and also more for the technically minded reader. He tried to have something for everyone. In Electrical Experimenter 1916, he had a story about a wireless whiz that was a bah humbug kind of guy and didn't believe in Christmas, who was converted by a little bit of electrical trickery. And then he explained exactly how he got the face of Jesus to appear at the fireplace. And he said that the gentleman was totally walked away believing. That was kind of fun. In the spirit of Christmas, told the story of a gentleman that had given so much to the club. So the QSA Radio Club's membership found a clever way to gift him a Christmas present. He was looking in the window at a radio set and dreaming about it, but he was poor and he wouldn't accept something as just a gift without a real reason. So they created a contest, and he was the winner because he'd given as the most to the club. I guess maybe we should have one of those contests. By 1921, the advertising was getting a little more creative. This Brandy's S.O.S. to Santa Claus was pretty colorful. And he sent for a catalog too. This was another way that they increased sales, was to offer a catalog along with just an advertisement for one thing. An ideal Christmas present. That would be an ideal Christmas present today, I'm sure. A Marvel complete radio outfit. It was only $15 in the December 1921 issue. And AMRAD jumped on the board with advertising. Efficient receiving sets for Christmas. Not a bad ad. By 1924, ads began to appear in radio news. And this, I mean, they continued to be in radio news, but they continued also to get a little more colorful. My choice this Christmas, the eagle. And the Mozart Baby Grand. This was pretty, it wasn't a full page, but it was pretty creative. The covers started to have a Christmas front. And this one encouraged grandma to shop. I guess they were just trying to get everybody. And maybe grandmas saw this and encouraged them. I just hope she didn't get run over by a reindeer on her way home. So his cover art led to increased sales, and he employed Howard Brown and Frank Paul to create those magazine covers. Here's an example of Howard Brown's, and his original oil paintings were recreated on early front covers of radio news. And they were, I'm sure they helped to sell, and they were quite creative and beautiful, almost frameable. Frank Paul designed the future in Gernsback's novel Radio for All in 1922. And this is just the beginning of some of his more futuristic designs. And it's something that there wasn't a whole lot of illustrations in Radio for All, but this one says it all. As a book author, that Ralph 124C41 that was originally published in serial form was reprinted as a book in 1925 and again in 1950. This is an example of two of his editions with dust jackets, the 1950 on the left and the 1925 on the right. The early edition dust jacket is very difficult to find. You can find the book, but to find the jacket it took Jim a while to find one. We were fortunate to add this to the book collection that was Hugo Gernsback dedicated this to the father of cybernetics, Dr. Norbert Wiener. And with the dust jacket, it's pretty cool. In 1926, Gernsback coined the term scientifiction, and amazing stories came out. And Frank Paul really got into work with some crazy designs, but they're very creative. And the Scientifiction emblem was created through a contest, and the contest winner, I don't remember exactly what they won, but the Scientifiction stayed and went right onto the Amazing Stories front cover. And even though, I mean, Hugo Gernsback was frugal to a fault. He did not like to pay any more than he had to. So I'm sure that some of his contests really paid off very well for him. Now we're getting to Christmas cards. I know that our journey hasn't really had a lot of Christmas in it, but you're going to get a kick out of these cards. He did have a quirky sense of humor. It wasn't always appreciated. They could range in size from 20 to 50 pages, but they were chock full of predictions, ideas, illustrations, his funny humor, and quite entertaining. And they were highly prized by those on his mailing list. Hundreds of cards were mailed to friends, fans, and personalities. And elite scientists and business associates that he liked, because he didn't always get along, he would be the recipient of these Christmas cards. It gave him a chance to share his vision of a future utopia, made possible through scientific invention. And some of the ideas that he put through actually were something that was, maybe it took years later, but they were creatable. First, the earliest card that we could find was 1938. And I don't know how if it was 1936 that was the first. We haven't seen evidence of 36 or 37, but this one poked fun at Saturday Evening Post. And as you can see, it was Christmas by Santa Claus, and it was censored. And this was getting close to the beginning of the war. And so it did just begin to have a little bit in there that was somewhat propagandish. By Christmas 1944, toward the end of the war, Harpy's Bizarre came out. And this one was a spoof on Harper's Bazaar. And it was quite bizarre. There were some quite colorful illustrations, and one of them was Beauty for the Masses. They were able to put together, the idea was that 100 women could go into this beauty assembly line. $2 each would cover a 1-hour treatment using lightweight moving chairs. Some automation was used. They actually put their hand into something that painted their nails somewhat like a car would be painted. Bizarre, to say the least. But this was his idea of trying to get everybody into a little more of a lighthearted humor after the war. The original artwork mock-up shows the detail that was put into putting together these Christmas cards. It was it cost something to do. It was no simple feat, but he loved to share these Christmas cards and loved to have great illustrations. Here's one where we kind of took a little bit of Paris into a hat that showed artillery. And yeah, it's a creative and quirky design. And that was one of the pages inside his bizarre book. And we had to throw a radio in there. This expensive heirloom radio. He was virtually impossible to steal, he said, because it has a shortwave transmitter and set a special switch at night or when you're away. This was to the thief who picks up the set. It sends out a special S.O.S, which is picked up by the nearest police station. The thief does not know about this. By the time he gets to the door, the police car is ready and nabs him. It was, Jim said we had to put this one in. 1944 had another Christmas card. I'm not sure if this was just before, but it is considered post-war and again, quite creative. And it says radio electronics and all its phobias. Gernsback ended up getting into a little trouble with this one. In 1945, he created this Tame magazine, which was a spoof on Time, and he made it look like Time, and that was to cause him trouble. Time had a trademark on the design of the frame, and others began to use it to promote their name or product. So on December 19th, 1945, Time didn't have the Christmas spirit. They served Gernsback with an injunction suit. Time requested that Gernsback never print another copy, but graciously allowed him to mail the remaining copies that had already been printed. Contrary to rumors in the publishing trade, so Gernsback says, not a penny was paid to Time by Gernsback. Neither did Time pay a cent to Gernsback. So it was one of those things that was, in the end, it was all resolved. Gernsback told the story in his next Christmas card called Digest of Digest, which was a spoof on Reader's Digest. And he calls it Articles of Wasting Interest. And the article was why Time sued Gernsback. By 1947, he was picking on Popular Mechanics. And Popular Neckanics Gagazine was his handout for that year. 1948, Colliers got hit with Jolliers, and he continued to get to Frank Paul. This one was heavily illustrated, and it was a parody on the Quick magazine. I had to look it up. I wasn't real familiar with it, but there was a magazine called Quick, and Quip took over. And if you look, it says Muse Weekly, WEAKLY. So this was a special Mars number. And inside, you can see the cover art on the side. He shares his visions of Martians. And it probably came down from that dream that he had when he was 9. I would imagine that some of these illustrations and ideas may have come from there. He did a parody on Newsweek too, Newspeak. And this one had a lot, I think he was concerned at the time about the possibility of World War III. So it was more serious in nature than his other cards. And he talked about all the different things that might happen if we went into World War III. He did sometimes use these not only to share his ideas, but to try to convince people. And who knows, it may have had somewhat of an impact, but thank God that we escaped that. By 1951, the cards became forecasts, and they weren't as creative, and he stopped having fun. Maybe he ran out of his favorite magazines. Instead, he created the forecasts. Forecasts for 1952 had a big eyeball, or it looks like an eyeball or a spaceship, but he was getting into thinking about space. And another thing that happened in 1952, his fan base for science fiction had him be a guest speaker and honoree at ChiCon. His editorial for Forecast 53 talked about the reason that he liked being in the future as opposed to the present or the past. And he ends with, look at the sky. You see the moon as it was nearly 1.5 seconds ago, the sun as it was over 8 minutes ago. And that is probably the chief reason why I, for one, like to roam in the future, It is exhilarating to get away from the dead and gone past. Of course, we preserve the past, but we do look to the future. By Christmas 52, he was talking about landing on the moon and exploitation of the moon. And he had a mind concentrator design that would help with all those distractions. And it does seem like earbuds do almost the same nowadays. And you can park a kid in front of a TV and it's not much of a concentrator, it's more of a waster, but it could almost do the same. And the beginnings of DVDs and VHS tapes. Broadway shows in your home. In Forecast 1954, he had a pretty detailed design of a radio watch. And as you see in the art that was made for it, it took quite a bit of design work for just a Christmas card. He'd already predicted a similar device, a perpetual radio view watch in Tame in 1945. So does it look a little bit like an Apple Watch? And here's a selection of some of the artwork put together and the bizarre cover. That Martian from Quip, that it really was quite attractive. Here's 1964, getting into space, a laser power space drive, and the beginnings of putting together that cover as the cover art. The last forecast was 1966. Gernsback passed away shortly after, and he was done, but he had continued to put out these forecasts into his 80s. Pretty incredible. Here's a selection of quite a few of those Christmas cards. The forecasts weren't quite as creative as the top group, but they were all quite fun. And there's a picture of the isolator to concentration, throw some oxygen in there and we can just be in great shape. He also modeled for Life magazine in '63, his Watchman prototype. He did get into some fantastic designs. So all in all, he was a visionary right to the end. He was quite a man. He had, with all those magazines, we'll share a few of the different magazines that he had that nobody knows about pretty much, although they may have hit that website, but maybe not. We do have a few that came from his original library. And look what Santa brought. I was thinking that maybe we could have a contest to try and see if people could identify. You might have to look at some of his old catalogs to figure it out. But there's a lot of fun equipment that we wouldn't mind getting for Christmas, and I'm sure most of our wireless counterparts at the Antique Wireless Association wouldn't mind having as well. Now, we at AWA wish you a very Merry Christmas and a happy and healthy New Year. This isn't Gernsback, but it was just such a great Christmassy cover from 1909 that it had to share it. And thank you. Thank you for going along with us on this journey today.